Welcome back, Marvels. You are catching Dana and I giggling again.
As always, yeah.
At the top of a session, or a session, an episode. Oh my gosh. Maybe
The
it
words
does feel like a therapeutic session.
The things you don't realize that therapists do. Here's one. We visualize like our entire life in 50-minute chunks.
So does my bladder.
Yeah, because I'll look at the clock, and if I have like 3 minutes, I'm like, oh my God, everybody else is like 3 minutes, that's it. I'm like, it's an eternity to us. I can go to the bathroom, I get something to eat.
Oh, it's 3 minutes is awesome.
That's a huge
there are
chunk of time.
times, yeah, totally. And I was telling my daughter the other day because, of course it's, Christmas time is here, and there are animal slippers for your feet. They're like super cute.
So cute.
And I said to her, Mia, I went to the Freud Museum, and they had Freudian slippers, and it was just like a stuffed Freud like on the front of it, and I had to buy them.
That's
and for
awesome.
a long time I wore Freudian slippers, and I was telling her the story, and she looked at me like,
you were crazy.
Yeah, which is true. Which has nothing, Freudian slippers has nothing to do with our topic today.
But another tangent, when you said Christmas time is here, I wanted to break into the Vince Guaraldi from the Snoopy Show, Christmas time is here. Yeah, that's
I love that.
We walk around singing that all the time. Christmas, yeah.
That isn't.
We are kind of popcorny ADD tracking today, which is funny because we're not talking about ADHD. Yeah, but
just
not.
Today.
Yeah, we usually are. Yeah. It brings to mind, though, that idea of how neurodivergent folks can talk to each other really well, because we sort of get each other. But we are going to talk about inertia today, or lack thereof.
Let's talk about inertia. And I feel like this is kind of an unknown thing. Especially, I don't usually hear other psychologists talking about inertia.
That's true, yeah.
I hear psychologists misdiagnose people with inertia as having borderline or pathological demand avoidance, or ODD, or conduct disorder, or there's a lot of that kind of stuff. I hear that a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because inertia isn't in the DSM, and psychologists only know it's in the DSM. Right.
Dana, will you quickly define inertia for?
So you hear it referred to as autistic inertia, but it's really neurodivergent inertia, because I think ADHD folks actually sometimes have a harder time with this. And if you're both, you really have a hard time with this. My mind goes back to my high school physics class when I was trying to grapple with and learn what was meant by inertia. So we have this thing on this planet called gravity, right? So everything, like if you drop something, it goes towards the floor. It's going towards the center of the earth. It wants to get pulled that way. And I still remember him holding like a little matchbox car up high on a track, and he was like, this has potential energy. I still remember that. And I'm like, what? And then it's fighting inertia, right? So as long as he was holding onto it, the car wasn't going down that track. It wasn't having the forces of gravity pull on it more than his hand was pulling on it or holding it. And then he lets it go, and the car goes down the track and ends up somewhere where it's still, right? And he says now it sort of has, it went from potential energy into inertia, and it was moving now, right? But we tend to think of autistic inertia as, where do we see that show up? We can stop things and not move and stay stuck in one place. That's no problem, right? And if we've started something, especially if it's something we're interested in, we can sort of keep that going. And in fact, if you're really into it, it's hard to pull out of that and stop. And it's the in-between, like if you really have a task where you're trying to get something done, oftentimes you run into a block between that state of not moving, and it's that initial moving that's really hard. And so people will talk about, I'm having difficulty with inertia, I'm having difficulty starting this. and or keeping it going once I start it. So the idea is, a body in motion tends to stay in motion, all these things you learn in physics that you sort of understand, but not really. And then you get to my age and you're like, oh, now I get it. So that idea is, let's get the system moving and then it'll tend to keep moving. But getting it moving is really, really hard sometimes. And I think the reason why people get those misdiagnoses that you're talking about is people will try a bunch of things to get someone going, motivated, doing something, working on a task, whatever it is, and they won't do it. And now they're, quote, air quotes for those that are listening only, pathological demand avoidance, or it's their personality, so they must be borderline because they're, resisting every movement I try to make to them, et cetera, et cetera. When really it's about this inertia piece, right? So we know that breaking down tasks or getting started on a task sometimes is overwhelming. And so doing smaller pieces is somewhat the key. But if you're not used to even doing that and you haven't sort of practiced that trick to get yourself going, you just stay stuck, right? And can't move and can't start something. And that's that lack of inertia, if you will, or getting that process going. I'm in the process of putting tile up in the walls in my bathroom, and the whole project's held up by me needing to cut these marble baseboards that I've gotten. And I have to do these corner cuts that are, it's always kind of nerve-wracking cutting corner cuts on my wet saw. I'm afraid I'm going to lose a body part or something. So I was putting it off. And then I'm like, all right, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to do a couple of these. I'm going to do like 2 cuts, but it's a pain, right? I have to get the wet saw out. It sets up outside because it's wet. Every time I use it, I get totally soaked because there's no way to avoid it. And so there was a lot of reasons for me to keep putting it off, right? And then finally yesterday, I'm like, all right, this is ridiculous. It's cold out. I don't want to get wet. I'm going to take a hot shower, get all warmed up, put on grubby clothes. I'm just going to go out there. And I did actually get it done, but I don't have them mounted yet, but I got part of it done. And that's something I've had to trick myself into doing a lot of times, because the thought of doing all of it gets overwhelming, and then I just stop and don't do anything. Right.
I think that's the classic. Like in my mind, the amount of overwhelm is the paralyzing factor.
Right. Exactly.
And so, the other thing I've heard this inertia called is treatment-resistant depression. Like we can't get out of bed, we can't get out in the morning, even though when that person gets moving, the day goes fine. Like really, the day goes fine.
Right.
And so, and this is why in my practice, we've got a few kind of phrases in my practice, but one is momentum over motivation.
Yeah.
We got to get you started. And the minute we get you started, we got to keep you rolling. And if we can kind of figure that out, and the tricking, the tricking, Dana, is like the biggest thing.
It's the biggest hard part.
It's the biggest thing. I mean, to the point where it's like, okay, how do we make the smallest, like, what is the smallest step you can make towards that thing X that is overwhelming for you, even if you like doing it? Like, Dana, you like doing time.
Oh, yeah.
You love it. So it's not about motivation.
Exactly. And it really is, when you talk about it's the motivation, and when people get mislabeled with these more pathological labels, I think that that's easy and lazy on the therapist part, because what you really need to do is dig into and figure out why the procrastination or why the not moving. And if you really start to explore that, and you know how to explore that and open up that key for folks, they'll tell you they're overwhelmed. And so, like for me, some of getting going on it is I haven't had a deadline for that project. So I could just keep putting it off indefinitely. I'm having surgery on one of my thumbs for EDS on December 18th. And now I'm like, oh crap, I'm going to be out of commission doing that sort of work for many months in a row after that. So now I've got a deadline. So that was starting to motivate me or get me going, but I was still resisting it because it's cold out and I don't like being wet and cold. And it was like, all right, well, I do want to get this done before then. And, again, I can't imagine what this is like for people, for kids or someone that hasn't figured out a way to trick themselves. But there's still things I can't trick myself into. And it's probably because I'm not motivated to do those things. I had signed up for this online CE seminar. It was going to get 2 hours of CE. All I had to do was log into Zoom. It was free. And I signed up for it. And then that morning I was like, oh, I don't want to do it. And I didn't do it. But I think for me, the not wanting to do it outweighed the wanting to do it. But then you can play all these fairy games in your head, like, oh, it's fine. I'll have plenty of opportunities to do this stuff later. And whether or not I do, I don't know if I will. I mean, that one's gone forever, right? But there really is a sort of sense of, I'll ask myself, how did I get so much done when I was younger and like in grad school? Because I had way more stuff I was getting done. And I think it was that momentum. I was going all the time. And so for me, it was hard to stop. And now that I've gotten to the point in my life where I can stop and I can rest, which is better because I was so driven then, I was a bit neurotic. Now it's harder to get going on things. But you give the key, which is what is the smallest step that you can take to do that? So what I did is I finally got myself out of that cycle. Like, what's the small step I can do? Oh, I can start marking some of those ones that need to be cut. So I just was putting painter's tape and the angle mark and the measurement. They stayed in my bathroom for 3 days. And I'm like, what's the small step? I can carry these down to the front porch because that's where I'm going to do the cutting. Knowing that I'm not going to even do it that day, but now I've gotten that much more done. The key is to trick yourself with those things that you're avoiding by doing what is the smallest step. But it's hard. And if it's something, that is something I like to do. If it's something you don't want to do, then I suppose that's really where those labels come in. Right?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, well, that's where that pathological demand avoidance
exactly.
really comes in.
Yeah.
It's so funny to me, Dana, I imagine you taking these steps, and, it's great because you can actually identify the next smallest step, for many, especially our ADHDers, that have a difficult time with the planning or the motor planning or the sequential planning.
That's right.
This first step is almost dang near impossible for them to identify. Yeah. I mean, to the point where someone's like, when I can't even get out of bed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so your next, do you believe that you could dangle your foot out of the blanket?
Yeah, you have to, because that's not something that occurs to them, right? I'll have things like that, like writing a big paper, a research paper. I'm like, so out of practice now. I'm like, where do I even start?
Yeah, you sit your butt in the chair. That's your next. That's your next smallest step. And then the next one is open up Microsoft Word. And then the next smallest step is close all or actually it should be like close all tabs.
Don't look at social media at the same time.
Install all these like website blockers, I mean, all of that good stuff. I mean, part of this too is so much of inertia in my mind is also very environmentally driven. So the idea of like, if you haven't set yourself up to get moving, then you will have a lot of barriers that will compete for your energy. Right. And, that's why website blockers, body doubling. I mean, they're we could go on and on about, I think, where a lot of the really effective strategies are for, especially like for adults, right? How do we get you started? Because it really isn't about you not wanting to do your job or not wanting to be a good employee or not wanting, like it has nothing to do with all of those things, which, by the way, is an awful internal battle. Yeah. I mean, this is where depression really gets fed and
you get gaslit because people tell you those things, right?
Yeah. And so it's really setting up your environment to be as successful as you can. Whether that's like your alarm is not next to your bed, your alarm is across the room. There's all these things, but people can benefit from sitting down with someone and saying, look, I'm actually really motivated. Like I want to finish this thing. I want to be a great employee. I want to get to work. I want to do all those things. I can't get there.
Yeah. Well, there's other factors too. I mean, I'm thinking of the me loving doing building stuff, but I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I also have POTS. So sometimes I'll have all in my mind, I want to do this. And then I get down there to do something and physically I'm not in my best place. And there's been plenty of times where I've worked on projects where every time I stand up, I get lightheaded and I have to stop and I'm like, damn it, I'm getting this done. And so there can be other factors that can feed into it besides just motivation. I kind of want to give that as
I hate motivation. I hate that word.
validation to the
Yeah,
load that so you are actually fighting to keep that car up at the top of the hill, or maybe actually you're at the bottom of the hill and you're being told you have to move the car up and
correct.
you don't have the energy, or you can get it halfway up and then you run out of gas and it falls back down again. So those are actual real things, right?
I think about, like, I don't know, in my mind, the image that comes to mind is like that Atlas Shrugged, where
Oh
it's like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
I'm like, instead of just holding the boulder, I've got to get the boulder up the hill to hold it even.
right,
And
right.
I get halfway up and I'm exhausted and I have to let go and I get run over by the boulder.
Yeah.
This is like the image I have,
Yep,
in my
yep.
mind. And yeah, I really hate motivation as a word. I really do, because it gets
Yeah, it's
tossed
such,
around like a
oh,
weapon.
yeah. I was talking about this with a client of mine yesterday about, especially in American culture, it's like persevere and push through. And, you see all these commercials like, you wake up, you're totally sick, take this medication, you can still go to work. And I'm like, that's probably not the best decision. And about like, if you don't accomplish and if you don't do great things with your life, somehow you're a loser. The majority of humans on this earth aren't famous. They're not known. They live their lives. They don't do these great things that everybody else hears about. It's okay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
pressure and messages around all of that, right? Right.
Yeah.
Like when you and I first decided to do the podcast, we didn't launch into it right away. We had several meetings to begin with. We did brainstorming and we both checked in with each other like, does this feel like a decent
Mhm.
schedule? And can we do this? And we get into it. And, it's so sometimes when something isn't defined yet, that can be the scariest one, right?
Yeah, the
That can be
unknown.
yeah, that's that I'm overwhelmed by it. And so sometimes it's just getting the data points. So if it is an overwhelm, like I need to physically do something, it can also be that mental overwhelm. Like I need to know what these points are. I can't live with the ambiguity yet, right? And checking that out. But those are all kind of higher order skills that you have to practice a lot and get to that, or have someone help you, like the body double or someone helping do that with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and Dana, I feel like there's a lot of reasons why our partnership works out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like we're very like-minded in many ways, and we can challenge each other and talk about things, and we
Sure.
can have fun together. But I think there's also, in our environment, if you will, our you and I are in each other's environment, and it's an understanding, trusting, compassionate environment.
Yeah.
So you can say to me, "Hey, Gwen, I can't tape. Like, I'm
Yeah.
probably not going to be in a mindset for taping." Or I
Yeah.
might, say to you, "Dana, my very, very anxious dog might have triggered the garbage disposal that was running for 4 hours. And now I have to get it." But, I mean, this hypothetically actually did happen,
Yeah.
which
Oh
has launched
God.
us onto another level of training
Yeah.
for separation anxiety. But, I think that's another piece too. So
Yeah.
many times, how much of our audience feels very isolated
Yeah.
in their experiences.
Yeah.
And so they don't necessarily have that other person in their life
Yeah.
to
Oh
kind of,
yeah. Yeah. Yep. When me
you've
and my
got
wife
Sue,
were,
like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. When me and my wife were in Montana for the funeral, we had downtime, so of course we went shopping.
Mhm.
And I like found a jacket that I really liked. I've been looking for for a while, and the medium was too big, and the extra small was too small, and I was just like, I just can't deal with it. And I would have just not dealt with it. But my wife's like, no, now you're going to know the size you need. Let's ask if they have any. And they didn't. And then of course my autistic inertia is like, well, forget it. And she's like, no, go online. They might have it online. And they did. And I ordered it, but I never would have done, and I got it. It's awesome. And I love it. Right. But I wouldn't have done, and I'm usually will have energy for those things, but I would have just stopped. And so she was like the body double, like, no,
Yeah.
just flip through your phone right now. Just, log on to the site and see if they have it. And they did. And it was like, oh, okay, this is cool. Right. So
Yeah.
sometimes it just takes a little nudge from someone who's compassionate, right? That can give you permission to do whatever, whether it's to stop or to go or to reconfigure. And it's amazing how much pressure there is just out in the world that is all black and white, and there's no gray. And it isn't okay to do anything in between. I was
Yeah.
looking at it she said to go look at it now. And I'm like, I'm in this other store. Is it okay to like literally be scrolling through my phone looking? And she's like, who's going to care? And I'm like, you're so right. So even there was this internal voice like, oh my God, you're doing something terrible. Don't do it. She's like, no one cares. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. And then just did it.
My gosh, Dana, by the way, if that's not diagnostic, that I don't know what is, right? Oh my God, I'm in a different store and I'm going to buy something from another
store while I'm in that store.
But I'm in that store. And I mean, like, that's hilarious.
It's my fear of authority thing. Like, the police are going to come and say, how dare you? Yeah, totally.
Yeah, they're going to come down like they're just going to get dropped. I know, they're just going to get dropped by a drone. You're buying something.
Come rappelling down the walls and arrest me.
Hilarious.
Yeah. But my point, just funny. But my point is it can be those little internal blocks even that just stop you, and you're like, oh my God, yeah.
Well, and I think the other piece here that gets forgotten is there's a huge sensory piece to inertia.
Oh yeah.
Right,
yeah.
like. There's a when Dana and I say regulatory, we're usually talking about the nervous system in some way, shape, or form. That it's active and aroused when it needs to be, and it's kind of like calm when it needs to be, and it moves in between those two spaces beautifully. And that's what we mean by regulated. But we know like autistics for sure, there is just more sensory information coming into that brain.
Yeah.
So there's just more overwhelm coming in, and that's not controlled.
This was a big store with a bunch of stuff and signs, and it had that horrible fluorescent lighting.
Oh, it's awful.
There were reasons I was already sort of peaked in probably sensation that I was like, I can't do this. Yeah.
And I mean, Christmas comes now at like Halloween.
I know.
Like Thanksgiving is not even, it's a speed bump on the way to Christmas, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, Halloween starts in the summer, right?
That's true.
And then, right, and then Thanksgiving is like a speed bump on the way. I mean, I would totally run over I wouldn't run over a live turkey, but a cooked turkey. Ooh, I guess they're both the same.
It's like a pause button to have some different food and then go on your way. Yeah. I was thinking about, this is a total tangent, but about Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, I do think you're right. It's just the capitalistic culture we live in. But maybe also people are realizing like Thanksgiving is a colonized holiday and it has all this horrible history behind it. So maybe it should just be a speed bump. Maybe it should just be if you want to gather with friends and family and have a meal, but maybe it shouldn't be, it's got an evil history. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an excuse to a moment to be like let's show gratitude for a very formalized way of showing gratitude for people,
and gluttony
or whatever,
because you eat too much.
Gluttony,
it's
the best. It's awful. It's like one of my.
And then you get really full and lay on the couch and you can't move, and now we're back to inertia again.
Inertia.
Yep. I can make anything come back to the topic at hand. Yeah.
You really do expertly weave that. Thank goodness for you, because I don't know where this show would be if it wasn't for you.
People would be listening. They're like, wait, the title of the show says this, but they talked about all this other stuff.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
We're talking about turkeys.
Yeah.
And for those of you, Dana and I have a very light approach to a light kind of upbeat, silly, sarcastic approach to things. And, we never intentionally try to insult or offend anybody.
Yeah.
It's never our intention coming out. And so we always appreciate, our audience if we
if we do that
or something,
let us know. Yeah,
let us know. I mean, and we'll might be defensive initially, but then we'll get there. I mean, like as all humans, but we promise to stay in it.
I feel like we should end this episode on a little bit of an Easter egg for our older viewers, and see if they know the reference. See if you know the reference. Okay. A line from a TV show. I swear on as God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly. Oh, you don't know that one? It's a WKRP reference. It's an old show. Where Thanksgiving, they decide to throw out turkeys out of a helicopter to people, or they're releasing these turkeys. And then, of course, you can imagine they thought turkeys could fly, and they cannot. So that's a big joke of people my age, you can say that around Thanksgiving and see if they know the reference.
Wow.
Maybe something from
It's a
Planes,
litmus
Trains, and
test.
Automobiles would have been better. Yeah. But yeah, that's the famous line from that. I swear as God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly. And then Far Side came out with a cartoon where it had like prosthetic wings so the turkeys could fly. It was really sort of cute. It's a whole
I
thing.
miss that. I miss
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
Far Side? I mean,
Yeah.
this is the time when we had newspapers.
That's true. Yeah.
So, I mean,
All
we
right.
still have newspapers, but no one reads them. Okay.
Yeah.
On that note,
we're demonstrating
right,
where inertia can take you. Like distraction can be an inertia that grabs onto you and stops you from what you're trying to do, which is to end this episode painfully. Be good to you. How's that? I'm just going to
be good
end
to you,
it.
everyone.
Yeah.
We'll see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye, everybody.